Uh, Great pleasure to have you all with us here today, this afternoon, to talk a little bit about utopias and dystopias and satires. I am Audio, one of the teachers here in a book a month, alongside Anna, right? And we are very, very happy to welcome you all to our little corner, right? The idea of this class today is for us to have fun, to talk about something interesting, but also for us to get to know one another. Okay. So before I start, can you just confirm if you can see my slides? Is everything working properly? Yeah? Okay. So our class today is called Dystopia and Satire in the History of Literature. And this is a little bit different of what we usually do in a book a month. As I have said, it is part of the idea of this class is for us to get to know you and you get to know us and our method. There will be a little bit of marketing throughout the class, but nothing extensive, don't worry. Okay. And this is a little bit more dense than what we usually do. Okay, we read books in English and we discuss it with our students. But today I'll be mentioning like 15, 12, 20 different books in the class. So don't get scared. Okay. So I am Audio. I'm a PhD in literature and I have finished recently my postdoc at the University of Padua. And I'm teaching two of the courses in a book a month. And um, Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I was just unmuting. Hi, everybody. So I think that most of you have come across us before on Instagram, but I think it gives a taste to get in touch with us a little bit more closely on an open class like this. So nice to meet you all. I'm Anna, and I'm one of the teachers and creators of A Book a Month. I am also a researcher as Audio. I currently work at the University of Vienna. I work at the Institute of Brazilian Studies and I teach literature here, something very similar to what we do in A Book a Month, but in Portuguese to foreign students, right, to Austrians and German speakers. And also I am a postdoc researcher. And both Audio and I, we are both teachers and researchers, and we take pride in bringing this side of our career and our work to A Book a Month as well. And for the ones who are getting contact with A Book a Month now, we are a school which is solely devoted into teaching literature in English, and we are very likely the only one in Brazil which teaches literature in English and English through literature in Brazil. And we have been doing that for quite some time. We have been doing this for almost 6 years, which is going to be completed in June. And we are very happy to host another open class to you in this afternoon. So I hope that you enjoy the class today. If you have any questions, Audio going to be speaking more, but I'll be always like answering your questions and your doubts on chat. You can use it as freely as you want. Okay. So Audio.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. And so, what we'll be doing today, guys, is similar to what we do in one kind of our courses, the course that is called novels. And we have different levels of novels, intermediate, advanced, and so on. And so, this semester, many of the books that we'll be reading are somehow related to utopias or dystopias. So, this is the course that I'll be teaching. And at the beginning, we'll be reading things by George Orwell. We'll be reading a little bit of satire later on by Vargas Llosa, a Nobel Prize winner, right? And then another course that is taught by Anna, the novels intermediate. The students will also be reading a little bit of satire, one of the books that we'll be talking about today as well, Candide or Optimism, right, by Voltaire. So this is to give you a glimpse of how our classes work on average, right? And that's all. That's all the marketing you're going to get. So let's get our hands dirty and start talking about utopia because we promised a history of the dystopias in literature, right? So, but before we can start with dystopias, we have to define a little bit what utopia is. And I'm pretty sure that we can kind of agree in the definition. I'm pretty sure everybody here knows what utopia is, more or less. And we usually talk about utopia as a kind of perfect society, right? A perfect community, or at least a near perfect community, right? Because we are also pretty aware, I think, about how paradoxical the idea of utopia is, you know? Um, we are different people, and in life, we hope for different things, right? So it is funny that often when we watch movies or we read books, we take for granted that just one simple kind of society, one kind of rule could apply to everybody around us and everybody would be happy, right? So there is a paradoxical idea surrounding this concept of the perfect society, or at least the nearly perfect, okay? And this is defining utopia as a political ideal, right? How should we organize the society in which we live? This is a political ideal. But talking about utopia in the context of literature is also talking about something else, which is a literary genre. Utopia is also a kind of story, right? And in that sense, it is a peculiar genre because most literary genres, science fiction, fantasy, historical novels, and so on, you can't really find someone who created the genre, right? There are very important steps along the way. In science fiction, for example, we often point to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley as the first sci-fi novel, the first science fiction novel. And it is not wrong. There is something to it. There are many good arguments for us to support this idea. But we can also find things that came before, which are also science fiction in a certain sense. The same thing applies to fantasy. The Lord of the Rings is a major contribution to the field, to the genre of fantasy, right? But it's not inventing fantasy per se. So this applies to many genres. There are important steps along the way, but for most genres, it is difficult to find just one book that has created an entire kind of story. But with utopia, that is kind of the case, okay? So utopia, the utopic as a genre, utopias as a genre, as a kind of story, they are strange because we can actually find the first one. And the first one, this genre is originating with a book by Thomas More, this politician in England. He was a lawyer. He was working for Henry VIII. And this guy has written a few treatises. He was highly influential, very rich, but eventually was executed by the king. Okay, so he criticized the king a little bit too much and paid with his life, and then became a saint. So he's canonized by the church. Imagine that. Okay, who would have guessed that the creator of the utopia is also a saint? And so Thomas More writes this strange book in 1516. Okay, so over 500 years ago. And Utopia is a pretty weird book. My slides are not moving, just a second.
We can see it well. It's just like stopped for a little bit.
Okay, I'll reshare it because it was not moving. And so when I say that this book is a weird one, we have to travel in time to understand why, you know? So I'll invite you guys to join me into this tunnel of to travel through time. Let's walk into my time machine back to 1516 when Thomas More was writing Utopia. And there are a few things, once now that we traveled 5 centuries, that we have to keep in mind that just a few years ago, a new continent appeared. People started talking about this new way to go to Asia, right? A certain Christophorus Columbus in 1492 discovered a way, a new way to reach Asia, right? To go to India. And it was so much cheaper. So it was great news. And then the Portuguese decided to join the party, and they sent, however, a mission going through the other way, right? Around Africa. And this mission stops along the way to check out what Columbus is talking about. And they discover Brazil, right? This is Cabral, Pedro Álvares Cabral in the year 1500. Cabral is going somewhere else. So they note the existence of Brazil and then they go away, right? The first expedition to really take a look in Brazil is launched 1 year after. Okay, so in 1501, Gonçalo Coelho leaves Portugal, comes to Brazil, explore the coast for a few months, and goes back on 1502, so the next year. Okay, alongside in this mission, alongside Coelho and the others, there was a person, an Italian guy, a guy called Amerigo Vespucci. Okay, Vespucci, who later on would give his name to the continent, right? The Americas, named after him. So Columbus, I think he got the name of a country, right? Colombia is named after him, but Vespucci kind of stole his honor in naming the entire continent, right? Interesting things are happening in art as well. In the very same year, when the first expedition is sent to Brazil by the Portuguese, the first expedition to explore around, Michelangelo starts sculpting David. And just 2 years later, Da Vinci starts painting the Mona Lisa. You know, so it's an interesting period in history because we're often studying those things separately. We're talking about the navigations and the missions of exploration in one kind of class. And then we're talking about the Renaissance in another kind of class. You know, in history, we're talking about colonization of Brazil. In the history of art, we're talking about the Ninja Turtles, right? Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Raphael and so on. But actually, those things are crossed. And Utopia is written kind of in the middle of all of this. So let's say in 1516, you have been looking at this new art that is being produced in Italy. You're hearing these new stories that people were telling you about a new continent, a new place that they're calling and the new world, right? And then you decide to read about it and you go into a bookstore and you buy this. Vespucci's letters, okay? So Amerigo Vespucci has written a few texts, like a long essays, like telling about his participation in the exploration voyages. He's talking about what he has seen. And those letters are published and they circulate in Europe. And he is convinced that this is a new continent, unlike Columbus, who thought that this was Asia. And he was wrong, right? So this is why America eventually got Vespucci's name. You already read this book in here, okay? So this is more like reading the news, but you want something different. And you cannot read Camões or Cervantes or Shakespeare yet because they were not born. They don't exist yet, okay? So what you could pick up to read is precisely Utopia. Thomas More has just published this book. And if you walked into the store, however, you would not really find it. If you come to me and ask, Audio, I want to buy this book called Utopia, I would be confused. Maybe I could offer to you a book in Latin called Libellus vere aureus nec minus salutaris quam festivus de optimo rei publicae status deque nova insula Utopia. The name is very long, and you have the translation here. This is a little book, truly made of gold, a book which is beneficial and enjoyable about how the state, how the government should work, and also about this new island that was recently discovered called Utopia. Oof, that's a hell of a title. Very long one indeed. And don't be fooled. Thomas More did not write this in English. Okay, we often refer to the book by the English title. He lived and he died in England, and so it is easy for us to take for granted that this essay was written in English, but it was not. It was written in Latin, actually. Okay, and so this is somewhat common at the time during the Renaissance to choose very, very long titles, and this will continue to be like that for another 2 centuries. People were not very good with titles, I guess. If you get this book, let's call it Utopia, and look, this is the front page. Okay, so this is the first page of the first edition, and you can see that it's not easy even to find the word utopia is written here. Can you see my cursor? Can you see the arrow? So it is here in the third line. You can see utopia. It's written with a V because in the manuscripts, the V and the U are exchangeable. Okay, so the books themselves, 400 years, 500 years ago, they look different. You will turn the page. You will notice that there are a few images and everything, and so you'll start reading and you will realize that this book is not really, it doesn't really look so much as a literature, a novel, as a literary narrative. It is a dialogue in 2 parts, a dialogue which is engaging with, dialogues which are the style of Plato, right? So Utopia is using the traditional form of writing philosophy. And Plato could be called one of the creators of Utopia as well, because his essay, The Republic, right? Where you find, for example, the myth of the cave, the Republic is precisely about how the perfect society would look like, how the state should operate, how we could ensure that people lead the best life they could lead, So the Republic is about a utopian society. And so Thomas More, even if he's inventing the word utopia, he's kind of engaging in a tradition already, okay? And you can see this because he chose to quote from Plato. Can you see it here? In Latin, he's using re publicae, the public thing, the republic. He's quoting the Republic right on the title. Okay, so it's interesting because although in a literature class, I have just told you the genre is born with Thomas More, in a philosophy class, your philosophy teacher, which is not me, will tell you differently. Will tell you that maybe it starts with Plato. Okay, so this is just one example of how the humanities can be confusing, and rightly so. Okay, we don't have to nail it. We don't have to reach one final decision. We just accept the 2 different ways of seeing this. Both of them are kind of correct. Both of them have their pros and cons. It's a way to interpret. He's writing this as an answer to Plato. You realize that this is a dialogue. You start reading. And at the first part, the first chapter, if you want, you notice that there is a story. You will read, look at this image in here. You can see that there is a small city, and then there are trees. They are sitting in a garden. And there are 4 people. It's not very easy to see, but there's one person in here another person in here, a third one in here, and the fourth is here, smaller one. So you have four people sitting in the garden and they're talking about life. Um, Mostly only two of the four speak. The person who speaks the most is a guy called Raphael Hythlodaeus. Very, very strange name. And this guy is a sailor, and he is the person who went to Utopia. And so he is telling the other people uh, what was his experience there and what he has seen. So he's talking about his trip, his voyage. And the person who asks him the most things and the person who is mostly talking with him is a guy called Thomas Morus, okay? Which is obviously the author himself, Thomas More. He just, Morus is the Latin version of his name. So although you have more people there, basically you have Thomas More and a guy named Raphael talking about a place that was recently discovered. And Raphael was a sailor, as I said, and he was sailing with Amerigo Vespucci, and he was left in the coast of Brazil when Vespucci was sailing. And he's actually he lives in Cabo Frio. Okay, it is Vespucci who was that mission by Vespucci that was the one that firstly found Fernando de Noronha, for example. It was they who discovered, right? How can you discover a continent where there are millions of people? But anyway, they are the ones who gave the name to a Baía de Todos os Santos. And then they get to Cabo Frio, and in there, they leave 24 people behind before they go on with the mission. And so Raphael says that he is one of those 24 people. And this is true. This is written in the letters of Amerigo Vespucci. And he and the other 24 guys start to travel, to travel around Brazil, and eventually they find the island of Utopia. So it turns out, for our immense surprise, I don't know you guys, but I was extremely surprised to learn that Brazil is Utopia, actually. We live in a perfect society. Right? Wow. País tropical and all of that, abençoado and so on. So Utopia is in Brazil, and Utopia is an island. Okay. And after we settled in the first part of the book, after we get to know Thomas Moros, we get to know Raphael, we get to know how he found Utopia, then the second part starts, which is the description of the island. And then we get an essay about how it works. What is the form of government? When people get married? What kinds of crimes people commit? Which are the punishments that they receive if they do something wrong? What is the religion they profess, or the religions, and things like that? Okay. What are the countries that surround them? When do they go to war? All things, all practical things. And there is no story there. Okay. It's an essay. It's like reading, I don't know, a manual about the politics of Germany, or the religions that you can find in China, whatever. It is not, if you find a book about the marriage customs of India, you would not bring it. It is an interesting, very interesting topic. Maybe you would bring to your anthropology class. Maybe you would talk about this book with your friend who studies sociology. But you would not bring this book to us, You would not come to your book club and to talk to your literature teachers and to talk about marriage customs in India, But this is exactly what Utopia is about. There is very little story and a lot of, I don't know, discussions about law, discussions about sociology, about religion and stuff. So I would say it is 10% plot and 90% essay, okay? It is a book that doesn't really feel much like a work of literature. This is why not many of us have read Utopia. And those that have, most of us didn't really like it or dropped the book in the second part because it's kind of boring. You can admit it. I won't be sad. Um, but in a certain way, it's also exciting in the sense that it can give us a glimpse of how people used to think 500 years ago. And one of the very interesting things about Utopia is that you will find a map, and here it is, okay? And not only a map, but there is the alphabet and also some quotations from poems written in the utopian language. So, you know, the people that lives in Utopia, they have their own alphabet, they have their own language. And so here you have it. And in the book, you even find translations of those texts into Latin, okay? And so you have all of this. And not only this, but do you remember the people that I've just mentioned that were talking in the garden? You know, Thomas Morus is the actual author of the book that you're reading. Then he's sitting, at his right. You can see him here at the right, Peter Egid. Okay, this is another intellectual of the Renaissance, and he did exist. And this guy is Johannes Clemens, who was a pupil of Thomas More. Okay, so one of his students, and this person also exists. Okay, so you get a lot of info that sounds super legit. You get a map, you get a language, you get an alphabet. This dialogue is happening between people that really do exist. And it is 1516. New places are being discovered. I'm sorry I'm using this word, but anyway, all the time, okay? For example, Cortés will enter Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztecs, in 1519. So 3 years after this book is published is when Cortés gets to the Aztec capital. The Incas have not even been heard of yet. Okay, so it is plausible that maybe Utopia is an actual place. Maybe it is out there. Maybe it is true. If you were reading this in 1516 and you believed it, you would be totally excused. Okay, so this is one of the interesting things about the book. The book is giving us information that is credible, that looks real, right? And the reason why they're doing it, Anna, please.
And this is one of the things that I find really fascinating about literature. When you are reading a book that's talking about something that is completely fictional, that we know it's fictional, but at the same time, the more we read it, the more we feel that what we are reading might be true somehow, right? So in this kind of reality fact, he probably worked a lot in Thomas More's time, but of course, it's not something that stopped there in the history of literature. It continued to be used by other authors in fantasy, in other kinds of styles, but more specifically in this example that I'm going to give you is in Dracula by Bram Stoker. And if you have already come across this novel before, you will know that this is structured not in an ordinary way. It's not only like a linear novel that we read and the introduction of the characters and such, but everything that is going to be introduced to us in the story, it's actually shown to us through kinds of things that we connect to reality, right? So this documented realism that the author is creating by presenting the novel using journal entries, diaries, phonograph records, something that is very similar to you recording yourself an audio so you can remember what you were doing and what you want to do in the future, newspaper reports, all of these kind of things that we connect to reality itself, we can see it present in this novel. And this is all laid there by the author in order really to mimic this process of forensic investigation of what's happening in the discovery of this vampire who lives in these very distant lands, right? This and all the other kinds of techniques that the author is using, such as the presentation of multiple narrators, multiple perspectives, because if one other person is saying and the other is saying and the other is saying, then it might be true sometimes. And the last thing that I find really interesting in novels like this, as it's precisely the same kind of technique that Thomas More is using, Bram Stoker also uses in his Dracula, which is the geographical precision, giving dates, specific times of trains, the name of places, the history of the folk, the history of how the people came up, all of this in order to tell a story of somebody who would never exist in the real world, right? But the more we have this late effect presented in the text to the audience that was reading this at the time, since it's something that is very different very distant in Transylvania, the more the sensation that what if it exists, right? What if this creature that lives in the distant world actually comes to London and hunts us all and kills us all, right? So by using this reality effect, he gets what he wants, which is this connection with the story, right? And I am rereading Dracula at the moment, and audio the other day, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I was reading with the audio phones, with the audiobook, and audio was like just poking me on the on the shoulder, and it was like, oh my God, I was so scared because you get so immersed in the story, and it feels that you are really joining this interview with the vampire that Bram Stoker is creating there. But of course, this is something that is also really part of something else, right? That we recognize in stories that are not necessarily Gothic, but are really belonging to the domain of fantasy. And in fantasy, for the ones who have the custom of reading fantasy, Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, Ursula Le Guin, whatever are you reading at the moment, there is something that we use and that we see, for instance, Thomas More using here, and then we recognize in fantasy writing, which is the creation of a world which is particular to the narrative that we're reading, right? In Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, we're talking about Middle Earth, that we have a map, we have the people, we have the languages, we have everything else created by the author. In Le Guin's A Wizard of Earthsea, we have also the map, the location, the archipelago of islands, the people who live there, how do they look like, how do they sound like, and so on, right? In other fantasies of all the world, we see examples like this. In Philip Pullman, I don't know if you ever had the chance of reading his works before. He's very famous for his Dark Materials, the trilogy, Northern Lights, The Golden Compass, and The Subtle Knife, which are some of my favorites. He creates this world which is part of the magic world, but also of the real world. So all of this, when we are reading those novels and we have to really get immersed in this world building that was created by the author, gives us the sense that we are actually stepping in to fiction, right? And giving and being surrounded by these worlds, which it's the reason why they're successful, right? The reason why it's nice to read them, because we get excited to be surrounded by fiction in this way, right? So, and of course, it's some of the techniques that we see very widely present in this kind of genres, but it can be actually used not only in fantasy or in Gothic or in Thomas More, right? But it can be used for different kind of purposes as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, we see authors applying very similar strategies to very different books and achieving completely different results. Utopia is a book that I was just saying is 90% political essay. And then Dracula is a gothic novel about a vampire that will drink your blood. And A Wizard of Earthsea is this epic story about a wizard that goes to magic school, just like Harry Potter. Completely different books, very similar techniques, though. Okay. So it's interesting how fertile literature can be and how many different results you can achieve with very similar strategies. And this brings us to one key question, though. If he's inventing all of this and giving us um, an alphabet and literature and all of that, how seriously should we take this essay? Okay. Should we understand it literally? Remember that utopia, although it is presented as a perfect society, has many, many problems. And if you actually read the essay, it doesn't sound that perfect at all. Actually, you could even argue that is even the opposite, a kind of repressive society even. Okay. So yes, people don't have to work so much. They work 6 hours a day. Okay. But yes, they don't like to go to war. Yes. Okay. But they still do. They still go to war. There are still all kinds of bad things happening. So it is not exactly the problem-free society that you would expect. It's kind of surprising when you read it. And maybe this surprise is there for a good reason. Maybe these paradoxes are intentional because maybe utopia is actually a joke. Okay, maybe this book is not serious at all. Um, and there are some elements that point to this direction. Okay. This book, we could argue, is a satire. And satires they can come in many shapes and sizes, but usually the basic principle of satire is laughter, is making fun of something, is making fun of someone. And in the satirical tradition, most of this process of laughter, this making fun of, is, used in all directions. So you read a text that is making fun of all the characters in the story, but at some point it starts to make fun of the author, him or herself. And then you're laughing comfortably. And then the book starts talking to you and starts to make fun of the reader. And suddenly you are also being made fun of. And then you're still laughing, but not so much anymore. You're kind of, suddenly there's a little bit of sweat in your forehead as well, So satire can be funny, but sometimes it can be sarcastic. It can be dry. It can be very highly ironic, so ironic that you feel it's very, it's almost painful sometimes. So satire really has no limits. It makes fun of everybody all the time about everything, really. And one of the reasons why Thomas More is engaging with satire, I think, in Utopia, is because he is aware of the inherent paradox of a perfect society. I've mentioned at the beginning of the class, we are different people. We expect different things from life. So it isn't likely that one kind of society, one way to live would fit all of us. What would make some of us extremely happy would make others of us completely miserable. We expect different things from life. And this paradox is a paradox that the book is embracing consciously. And we can argue this because, for example, because of the names. It is very known the fact that utopia comes from the Greek, and it means no place. Okay, so nowhere. Um, Originally, the name of the island should have been Nusquama, okay? Because Nusquama is nowhere in Latin, okay? But then the book was written in Latin. If he had used the word nowhere in Latin as well, it would be too obvious maybe. So he decided to use the Greek. So he used no place. And in the 16th century, if you knew Latin, you knew Greek as well. Probably your Latin was much better than your Greek, but still you knew Greek, you could read Greek. And so everybody would notice. The public that will be reading Utopia in 1516 will understand the joke. And they will go further because, I've showed you the map. Let's go back. And the map is here, and you have 54 cities in this map. Okay. And we have the names for many of those cities. We have the names for rivers. We have names for many things. And pretty much all the names are somehow ridiculous. Okay. There is another city that is called Ahora, no land in Greek. There is a river that is called anhydrous, okay, no water, okay, like hydrophobia, for example, hydrophobia. So it's coming from hydro, just like this. So a river that is called no water. So those are obviously ironic names. Those are jokes. And the joke goes further, okay, because Thomas More Latinizes his own name. So rather than presenting himself with his real name, he's changing his name into its Latin form, morus, which sounds exactly the same as the Greek moros, and moros in Greeks means stupid, means fool. So he's making fun of himself and changing his last name to be Thomas Idiot, okay? And Thomas the Fool is talking to a guy with the very weird name of Hythlodeus, and you can understand that that is there for a reason. And Hythlos in Greek, the first part of the word, Hythlos, means bullshit, nonsense. Okay? So his name is something like skilled in nonsense, filled with bullshit, something like this. So if we had to translate his name in Portuguese, it could be Rafinha Besterol, okay? Or Rafael do Miguel, something like that, okay? So, and notice in this book, the person who is giving you the information is the person whose name is nonsense. And the person who is believing this information is the person whose name is fool or stupid. Okay. So what should we make this out of this? Is this to be taken seriously, or is this an are we making fun of you? You bought the book, you read the book, it was not easy, and then you're being called a fool by Thomas More, who is calling himself a fool as well. What do we make out of this? So this is a very good example of satire. Okay, this kind of laughter that is happening all around, and people will continue this tradition for centuries in literature. Satire is very alive. Thank you very much. It's doing well and it's healthy. And so here are some continuators of this tradition. If you read Gulliver's Travels, for example, by Jonathan Swift, he goes to many societies. Some of them are utopic, some are not. Some are, we could maybe even say dystopic, maybe. And those are the names of the societies, okay? How do you read this? Glubdubtrib, okay? Obviously, that's a joke, okay? And even better, these guys are the fourth, each one of these is one country. This place in here is an utopic society, and those guys are horses. How do you read this name? Something like, okay? So this is the sound that a horse makes, okay? So even the name is already making fun of us. How do you read this shit? I mean, when I have to teach this, I'm obliged to imitate a horse, as I just did. And I rarely do this, only when I'm teaching satire or when I'm playing imagem em ação. I think that's pretty much it, So satire is about making fun of things, and this will continue. For example, in Candide, one of the books that Anna will be teaching this semester in the novels intermediate course, because Candide, it means naive, right? Ingênuo, cândido even. In Portuguese, we also have that version of the French, right? And the book has a subtitle, Candide or Optimism. And Voltaire, one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, Voltaire has written this book to make fun of one of his enemies, another philosopher called Leibniz, right? So he's making fun of Leibniz. who said that our world is the best of all worlds. It's the best possible place. You don't have to look for utopia because you already live in utopia. And Voltaire is like, ah, yeah. So he writes a story in which only tragedy happens from the beginning to end. Uh, but it's not a sad story either. It's sad things are happening all the time, but Voltaire is presenting them in a satirical way, kind of funny way. And you have this element of utopias within this big tragedy, because at some point, for example, Candide goes to El Dorado in the Americas. So it's just like utopia. And in El Dorado, they live the perfect life. They are super rich, they don't have to work, etc., etc. So Voltaire is engaging with this tradition as well, but changing it a little bit and emphasizing even more the satire. And this will continue. George Orwell, when he writes Animal Farm, he will do this the very same thing. Animal Farm. I'm sure probably all of you have read it already. It is a kind of a fairy tale. It is a fable. It is an allegory of animals taking over. And there is a strong irony inside it, but it's not a funny one. It's kind of, it's the kind of dry, acid humor that I was talking about. It's not necessarily, you won't be laughing a lot until your belly hurts. It's more like, ouch. Okay. So this brings us to our second part of the class today, which is, now that we know what utopia is and how complicated and paradoxical this concept is, and how utopia is genetically related to satire, now we can start talking about dystopia. And you would imagine that dystopia is easy to define. Now that we know what utopia is, then dystopia is the opposite, right? Not really, not really. Starting with the fact that the names don't really match. Utopia is no place. It's not called good place. Good place in Greek would be eutopia or eftopia. So Eugenio, for example, genie, right? From being born, eu, good. So Eugenio is the person well born. Okay. Eugenics, the science of controlling biologically birds and stuff, it's precisely connected to this. Okay. So utopia would be the good place, and dystopia would be the bad place. But the name is not utopia, it's utopia, no place. Okay, so even the names are not exactly one the opposite of the other. Okay, and so, oops, sorry. They are not really opposites. They are not really the two sides of the same coin. They are more like brothers, not twins, brothers or sisters. They look alike, and you can see that they are in the same family, but they are not exactly, Ruth, Raquel, Diego, Diogo. Okay, it's not exactly the good guy and the bad guy. It's more like they are like normal brothers and sisters. Okay, plus they are not funny. They're not funny. Dystopias, they're not really ironic in the sense that of the, a ironia do Machado. Okay, so that kind of irony, the irony that you're laughing about, it's not really, you don't find that. And you don't find a lot of essaying either. Okay, I've said to you, Utopia by Thomas More is 90% essay, only 10% plot. In dystopia, you often get 100% plot. If you read 1984, you get a story from beginning to end. There is no, class in there. You won't stop to have to read a philosophical manual about the future, So you have much less of an essay and much more of a plot. I don't know why my mouse is doing this, guys. Sorry. And dystopias are also future oriented on, usually, not always, but it's common for them to be happening in the future. Utopia was not happening in the future or in the past. It was, just this other place far away from here that I have discovered. So this new island, it does exist right now. You just have to go there, So utopias are about traveling somewhere else. But dystopias are often about going to the future. So you're not moving in space. Often with dystopias, you're moving in time. Okay. And often you get the opposite of one another because utopias, usually in utopias, you have the perfect society, which is usually isolated, and then you have one or two or three visitors that come. So it's more like going on a voyage, going on a trip to a country abroad, you know? It's like reading a touristic guide, you know? But with dystopias, you get the opposite. You often follow one character that was born into that society, a person that is native to that environment. And this person is actually trying to escape. So in utopias, you get someone coming in, and in dystopias, you get someone coming out, going out. In utopias, you get a foreigner coming in. And in now you get a native going out. So in this sense, they are, in this particular characteristic, they are the opposite of one another on average. Okay. But still, often students are surprised to learn that many literary critics consider dystopias more similar to horror novels than to utopias, okay? Because one of the things that dystopias are doing is they are exploring what we call the aesthetics of fear. So dystopias are about oppression. They are about dehumanization. They are about humiliation, violence, lack of freedom, being outside of nature. You know, in almost all classic utopias, 1984, Brave New World, there's not even nature. People don't even get plants, let alone freedom, okay? Not even plants. Sometimes you don't even get food. You have to eat pastes of stuff or they inject things on you, you know? So you have these new technologies that make life for humans completely unrecognizable. So dystopias are very much about dehumanization and about fear. And this is the basic mechanism of how horror stories work. Okay? This is how the Gothic novel works. So many literary critics argue, and I agree with them, that 1984 is more similar to Dracula, for example, than it is to Thomas More Utopia. Okay. So in a certain sense, they are dystopias could be considered a kind of horror fiction, if you want. Look, how interesting is this? A completely different way to look at the genre. Okay. Um, so yeah, we will be studying some classic Gothic fictions this semester. Anna, would you like to talk a little bit about them?
Yes. Um, but just a comment about the fear of dystopias. I completely agree with the comparison, mostly because when we're talking about dystopias, mostly the source of fear is really what could happen. And one of the basics of dystopias is really that they often play with things that actually could happen, right? We get it confirmed in when we are living now in the 21st century with this chaotic world, and then we look back in these dystopias that have been written in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s and 1980s, and we just like, wow, how right they were, right? And this is one of the things that has to do with the Gothic in the sense, because the Gothic, even the ones that doesn't seem so, for example, Southern Gothic, for instance, or psychological theory, it really has to do with what people of the time in which these novels are being written tend to fear the most. It could be apparitions, it could be the uncanny, it could be the insolent, it could be something that doesn't belong to this world, but also it can be something like epidemics, for instance, right? Which is the basis for some of these novels that we're going to read in the Novels Big Reads in the semester. The topic of the novels Big Reads, which is a course that I teach. It is a bi-weekly course. We have two groups that follow the same program, right? So you can join each of the classes each of the time, and you will see the same thing. And we meet twice a month, and we are going to read slowly this big thick books, calhamaços, as we say in Portuguese, right? Because I mean, Dracula has around 700 pages or something, so we need a little bit more time to read stories like this. And we begin with Dracula by Bram Stoker, which is the first time that we're reading this novel in a book a month. And I am a huge fan of vampire novels. We have read others before in a book a month, but it's the first time of Dracula. And I'm super happy that we're going to read this one together. So we're going to talk and get deeper in the subject of what we talked about today. And we'll read it throughout February and March. So 2 months reading this novel because we need a time. It's a long book. In April and May, we're going to read the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison's most famous novel, Beloved, which is a different kind of Gothic. It is something that we call the Southern Gothic, which embraces the fear of that generation and that society, which is really the deep South, the racism, the inequality, all of the struggles of the history of the American Civil War and etc. It is a historical fiction. And it's a beautiful novel, very touching novel by Toni Morrison that combines all of these social things in with the supernatural operations or the possibility of them, right? So this is going to be the second reading of the course, and we end up the course by reading Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which is a shorter novel, so that's why we leave it to the end. And it's also gothic, but it's a different one. It's a kind of a suggestion of the psychological terror that might be inside the characters' minds. And we, as readers, we're not really like sure what's happening. It is something spectral, or it is true, right? And in combination in this semester, we're going to talk about vampires and ghosts, but most specifically, we're going to talk about the genre of Gothic. And in many cases, we are also going to talk about the genre of dystopia as well, because they are united and together. Yes.
That's great. Thank you so much, Hannah. So continuing, right, now that we've made this connection between the Gothic and the classic dystopias, I think there are four books that I have to mention since this is a class on the history of literature. So one of the first, what we call one of the first technological dystopias, okay? Because dystopia is very connected to this idea of dehumanization. And you can dehumanize without technology, that's possible, but technology can help so much. Now, now after ChatGPT for the past, I don't know, 2 years maybe, we started to use sentences like this was produced by humans. Now we have to specify when it's produced by a person, like what? This text was written by a human, what the hell? This is completely new, right? And we're facing a process of dehumanization of so many things that now 30% of what you see in your Instagram feed is actually art, videos made with artificial intelligence, right? So I promise to you that I do exist and that I'm not a hologram, but maybe in a few years' time, who knows? Anyway, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is a huge name in the history of science fiction. He has written in other genres as well, fantasy too, surprisingly. A little bit of everything, but a little bit of satire as well, but mostly sci-fi. And in this one of the earliest also narratives about time traveling. This guy creates a machine to travel in time, and he decides to go to the future, to the year 800,000 or something. So it's very much into the future. And once he gets there, there are new kinds of humans. So basically, humankind has evolved into different species. And originally, he thinks that one species has conquered the others. Okay, because he finds that one species, they are very beautiful and so on. The others are living underground, etc. So there are many, many things to be said. It's pretty complicated. But it turns out at some point that he got it wrong. The guys that he thought were controlling actually were being they are eaten by the other by the other race, and this group is actually just built, keeping them as cattle or something. So it is interesting because it's one of the dystopias in which initially you get the impression that this society is utopic, or at least for the people with whom he sympathizes. And then it actually there is an inversion, and you discovered that no, you were wrong all along. So this is one classic mechanism of what we call the classic dystopias. And I'm sure you will get to know all the others as well. In 1922, a big name, okay, Zamyatin from Russia. We already writing just 5 years after the revolution. The Russian Civil War is happening. There is famine, millions of people die, etc. So Zamyatin condenses all of this into this novel that is happening many years into the future as well. People have no names anymore. They have numbers. They are numbers. They live in these big buildings made of glass, so everything is transparent all the time, etc., etc. He tries to escape, and then you can read the book to see if he will manage or not. 1932, you get Brave New World, right, by Huxley. Um, and in this one, very similar thing. It's set in the future, but now it is a dystopia in which all aspects of your life are controlled by the state. So it's a totalitarian state that control everything you want. But you have the illusion of being controlled because they give you drugs, and then you can have all of those. And so it is interesting because you're not having a bad time. You're having a good time. But so, very ambivalent, very disturbing to many aspects, and especially because of the date of publication, 1932, already highly influenced by 1922, by We, published in 1922, And then obviously maybe the most famous of them all, 1984, which was written in 1948. Okay, so basically when Orwell was working in this book, he just swapped the two numbers. Okay, so 1948 becomes 1984, and then the book was published 1 year after, 1949. This, once again, this society that is happening, that is existing just 25 years into the future, or 35 years into the future, sorry. This society run by this party, by the Big Brother, right? The Big Brother is a concept that was born in the dystopia, for God's sake. This idea about you being watched all the time, no individuality, no privacy. And now we're bringing our Big Brothers around all the time with us. And actually, these little fellows, they know more about us than we ourselves, right? So Orwell is really one of the most influential versions, I think, probably the most influential of all these. But they are already communicating with one another because Orwell is somewhat answering to Huxley, but he's mostly influenced by Zamyatin. And Huxley is also influenced by Zamyatin, who was influenced by H.G. Wells. So you have already a chain of influence in the classic dystopias. And this brings us to our third part, which is there are many other types of utopias and dystopias that will show up. And so far, we have only talked about dudes writing, right? So guys writing this very aggressive, very, combative forms of society. You see a lot of wars, you see a lot of catastrophes of all kinds, but there are other utopias or dystopias, depends how you want to look at them. They're pretty conscious of the ambiguity, and which are, yes, interested in politics, yes, interested in economics in the same way that Orwell, Huxley, Zamyatin are, but There are some of them. They are also very interested in the cultural aspects of utopias and dystopias. And this is the case with Ursula K. Le Guin, right? Le Guin, in my opinion, and in Anna's opinion, I know, so because we talk so much about her, Le Guin is absolutely brilliant, brilliant. She's one of the great writers of the 20th century. And the only reason why we don't hear about Le Guin being discussed in the same circles as Machado de Assis and George Eliot and Balzac is basically because there is still some prejudice against fantasy and sci-fi and so on. Once this prejudice ends, and I hope it will end soon, someday, at least I hope, once this prejudice ends, people will look at Ursula Le Guin as a great writer that she is. You know, there all possible genres of literature can lead to great art. There is no one genre that is better than others, right? Yes, Anna, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add that one of the things that I also, it's a shame that Ursula Le Guin is not so recognized as other writers of the same genres that she writes, because she writes in the domain of of men, most of the male writers, right? So she writes fantasy, she writes dystopias, she writes uh, stories that are sci-fi, social sci-fi, and all of the majority of the writers of these genres are men. So writing in this kind of setting and getting like how deep she was, because when you read her, she's an absolute scholar, right? And she's
Mhm.
amazing. So it's really a pity, but I think that she is the author that we have most read recurrently in a book a month, right, Audrey?
Yeah,
Because we're
true.
trying to make do, because she's amazing. We love her.
True, true. So now that we have vented our frustration with the Ursula Le Guin being ignored criminally, we can talk about The Dispossessed, which is a beautiful novel set in this, alien society and so on. You have two planets. They look like humans, but they are not humans. And you have these two planets, and they are ruled by different political systems. One of them is an anarchist planet, and the other one is like an ultra-capitalist planet. And what happens is that there is no contact between the two. And so what happens is that one guy is extremely smart. He's a studying physics, and he develops a new theory of physics. And so they bring this genius from the anarchist planet into the capitalist planet. And so what happens is that in his mind, he's coming from the perfect society, from utopia into the dystopia, right? And it's a very interesting novel, and because it's giving you the two in just one blow. And Ursula Le Guin has chosen a subtitle, an ambiguous utopia, precisely because she's giving you the two, right? It is ambiguous. She's very conscious of that. And and the title for me is brilliant because it's a triple pun, okay? A pun, un trocadilho. So it's a triple pun because these people in this planet, they are the dispossessed because they are anarchists and they don't have private property, so they don't have possessions, right? So they are dispossessed because they don't have, eles não têm posses, right? So os despossuídos, they don't have posses. But also, this guy is the dispossessed because he leaves his planet behind to go to the new planet, right? And in this planet, this ultra-capitalist planet, it's all about possessing stuff. So the dispossessed is it's not only talking about the planet, but also talking about the guy. And third level is actually hinting at Dostoevsky because one of the last novels by Dostoevsky is called in Portuguese Os Demônios. But in English, the first translation was called The Possessed, os possuídos. And so Ursula Le Guin is quoting from Dostoevsky and actually writing the dispossessed. So you had the possessed by Dostoevsky and then the dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. A pretty cool game to be playing around, right? So this is showing to us how this kind of book is interested in culture. And the list will go on because we also have feminist and utopias and feminist dystopias. This was one example, okay? Charlotte Perkins Gilman writes Herland in 1915, and this is about this perfect society that exists somewhere in the Americas. This perfect country of women in which there was a biological mutation and they can have children without men and but only women, right? So basically they lived up there and then they developed gradually a really great society, and until three travelers arrive, they are three guys, and obviously all hell breaks loose, but without the men the society was pretty cool. This is what we get in Herland, a feminist utopia. And we also get a similar thing on the other side of the spectrum, right? The Handmaid's Tale, for example, by Margaret Atwood, which is giving us a feminist dystopia, right? A world in which women are oppressed in all kinds of ways. And this is also extremely ambiguous and particularly nasty, because every single thing that appears in this book, and there are so many horrible things that happened in here, every single thing has already happened in the past. She's not inventing anything. She's just taking different things and putting them together. Okay? So one thing that you have in this novel, for example, are rape camps, for example. This is something that really did exist during the 20th century. For example, in the war in Serbia, during Bosnia and so on in the 1990s. Okay, so this happened during the Second World War in Asia, and so there are many terrible things. If you want to look throughout to history, you find Margaret Atwood sources, and it's pretty scary precisely because of that. But not only, you can go to talk about the climate, for example, right? And therefore ecological utopias or dystopias. And Margaret Atwood is writing once again on this style. Or you may look into Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower, in which this black girl creates this new religion. She's a kind of a prophet. The world is crumbling down, ecology, climate change, all of that. And so she little by little develops this new religion and starts growing. Very interesting stuff. Always dealing with both possibilities, using stories to think about which kind of society we want to escape from and which kind of society we want to build. And this will lead us to our fourth and final part of the class, which is about hybrid forms of utopia and dystopia, which we find in contemporary literature. And I will talk about these in we still have 10 minutes, so we're going to come back to this. Just before, now a little bit more of marketing. If you already had enough, you can go to the bathroom, grab a beer. We won't be sorry, okay? We won't be offended. But all of this class is a good example of what we do in this kind of course in novels. Anna has mentioned before the novels Big Reads, for example. This is the kind of class that I would be teaching in Novels Advanced, but this is very dense because what happens is that our students are reading one book every month. Look at the name of the school, a book a month, right? And then you read the chapters, half the book, you come to the class. The classes are happening once every 2 weeks, so you have time, and then we discuss. And I present some information, but also in here, we're not discussing anything today. Me and Anna are doing all the talking, right? But in our classes, we are always asking questions, the students are answering, and so there's a lot of debate going on. The idea is precisely to create an immersion in which you are reading in English, you are learning in English about literature, you're discussing and debating your ideas also in English. So precisely to get this like, this rounded usage. And those are the books we'll be reading. We'll start with Animal Farm, and also we'll read a Russian author, Bulgakov. Very funny, very cool. In March, we'll read To Kill a Mockingbird, O Sol é para Todos in Portuguese. Beautiful, heartwarming story. In April, we'll read The Catcher in the Rye, a great classic by Salinger, who is an author we all know, who has been touched by the finger of God. The guy's amazing. Everything he wrote is amazing. Llosa is Peruvian. We'll be reading this in translation. He won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. And we'll end with another Nobel Prize, Bernard Shaw, who is writing theater. And he's not so well known in Brazil, I think, but in England, he's only second to Shakespeare, sincerely. Bernard Shaw is extremely influential for the history of theatrical literature in the United Kingdom, right? So we'll be ending with one of his funny comedies, Man and Superman. So not only that, but we there are other courses in which you don't have to read an entire book, because we know that time is short and people are always on the run. So maybe you only have 1 hour or less every week to read. Maybe you can consider joining the short stories course. This is taught by Anna. And then the idea in here is different. You get a banquet of different authors from all around the world, different genres, different language, different kinds of literature, different styles, precisely to you to try a little bit of everything. And so these are the amazing people we'll be reading. I won't present all of them, but I don't know. James Joyce, probably the most influential author of the 20th century. Garcia Marquez, he's amazing. We all love him. Coetzee, who is alive and is writing, Nobel Prize winner. Zora Neale Hurston is from the US, a Black author that is often not read so much as she should, because she's really, really great. We'll be reading horror stories by Daphne du Maurier. Karen Blinksen is from Denmark, but she writes in English. And she is famous for, she has lived for over 20 years in Africa, so she writes a lot about Africa from the perspective of an European, right? But we also get before her Bessie Head from South Africa, who is giving us the experience from someone from there, right? So the whole idea in here is trying to build a nice mosaic for you guys to have this great experience. And in here you have the classes are happening every week, and you always have one short story to read. If you can't read, no problem. You can come to class and enjoy. It's not a big of a deal. But maybe you don't have time even for that. And so maybe you could join this one, reading class, which is a course that I'm teaching. And the name says it all. We read in class. You just have to come to show up for 1 hour and a half every week. And then you will discuss all these amazing people, including contemporary authors like Calvino or Murakami, Sylvia Plath, obviously extremely talented author in everything. Her novel is amazing, her poetry is amazing, her short stories are amazing. Sylvia Plath is, oh my God. And one of the curious things we'll be doing this semester is we'll be reading Fernando Pessoa in English, because we often forget that Pessoa also wrote poetry in English. His first two books were published in English, and they're called 35 Sonnets, the first one. And so it's a Fernando Pessoa which who we ignore often. So those are the people we'll be reading. Joyce Carol Oates is still alive, contemporary literature, a little bit of sci-fi, another Nobel Prize winner with Thomas Mann. Anyway, and the course is happening every week as well, every Tuesday or Wednesday. And our students, they can move in between classes. Finally, if you think that you also would like to study English, maybe you would like to improve. Gabi, unfortunately, could not be with us here today, but Gabi we are lucky to have her as part of the team. She is teaching the English classes in a book a month. She is super, not only has years of experience in that, but has all the certificates, and she's graduated in letras and all of that. And she's teaching English, two levels of English, intermediate and advanced, that are happening weekly, on a weekly basis. Those are the time, and that is the schedule. And so this is a pretty good combination because you can study English and then come to literature class. You'll have a lot of, you'll be in contact with the language twice a week in using different levels of it, talking a lot, reading a lot, studying grammar. It's really helpful for your development, that's for sure. If you're looking for the prices and the schedule, you find everything in our website. You find everything in Instagram. They are here if you want to print it also. Okay. Um, and this is the schedule. Okay. So same thing, Instagram, website, in here, whatever you prefer. You can also approach us. Whew, that's good. We still have 5 minutes to end up on time. Great. So, fourth part, hybrid forms. We see this a lot in contemporary literature. And I chose books by authors who are still alive on purpose. Okay? Because I do think a lot of the contemporary world is pretty crazy. I think we all know this by now, right? And we do see things happening around us, and so this is maybe one of the reasons why there's so much uh, entertainment which is related to utopia or dystopia. There are so many series about it, be it a crazy fungus that brings civilization to collapse, or a zombie, or Don't Look Up, or movies. It's all around us all the time. We're talking about the possible arisal of a dystopic society of some sense, or annihilation of the species, and so on. And so in literature, I think even authors that are not really writing dystopias, in a certain sense, they're highly influenced by this. And Murakami is maybe one of the best examples. Look at the title of of the book, right? And Q in Japanese is 9, right? So it sounds the same in Japanese. So actually, if you read the book title in Japanese, it is the same. You can't really, if you're just listening, not reading, you can't really make a difference between 1984 in Japanese. I'm sorry, I don't speak Japanese. I don't know how that would be. But the title sounds exactly the same. They are homophones. And this is kind of a dystopic society. If you read the book, very long book, 1,000 pages, but you do have like this crazy cult. You do have alternate societies. There is this dream quality, as everything that Murakami writes, but you also have this feeling of claustrophobia, this feeling that you have to try to escape, to try to survive, and stuff like this. And this is also something that you find a lot in Hong Kong, who has recently, just 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, won the Nobel Prize, right? She's from South Korea. And Human Acts, especially, it's about the violent suppression of protest in Korea in the 70s or 80s, if I'm not mistaken, in which hundreds, if not thousands, of people were tortured and killed. It's a very heavy book. So it's not a dystopia per se, because it's not, it's about one episode that is extremely tragic, but it's not exactly like 1984 in the sense that you have this society whose purpose is to destroy you, but you can clearly see the influence. And even in narratives like The Vegetarian, one of the books that Anna will be teaching, um, we could also see elements of a feminist dystopia in here. This book is about questioning gender roles. You can see so much of the woman in the narrative. She's oppressed in so many ways that is disturbing to read. It's a book that is creating a lot of interesting debates, but it's not very pleasurable to read. I think it's very interesting, but it's not necessarily it's the kind of book that you cannot stop thinking about after you read. Very short, very easy to read, although the emotions are heavy. And but you can feel this sense of claustrophobia, of dehumanization, and so on. So it is also there. And if you want to try something contemporary, but which is maybe lighter but not so much, you can try Kazuo Ishiguro. Never Let Me Go. There's also the movie. It's a dystopia that you won't even realize it's a dystopia until you get to, I don't know, 60% of the book. So that's the only thing I'll tell. But it's so beautiful. You could even say it's psychological, because it's at the center, it's a love story maybe, but it's like this person remembering her life and this woman thinking about this guy that she loved so much and why they didn't end up together. So you would think that is this nostalgic love story, and suddenly things starts to get weird and weird and weird, and you end up in a very different place than what you imagined at first, you know? So in a certain sense, it's quite similar to what Murakami is doing too. And to end up, maybe the final supreme irony of talking about utopias and dystopias in the history of literature is that we took the biggest symbol of a dystopian society and turned it into entertainment. I do think it is amazing, really. I really would love to know what George Orwell thinks that about the fact that Big Brother is in the 26th, 5th edition. I don't know, but over 20 editions for sure, right? It shows to us how much we are interested into this kind of stories, but also how relevant they are, right? And for pretty much everything from for politics, economics, culture, gender, race. You may if it's human related, utopias and dystopias have their place. Okay, that was it, guys. Thank you so much. We will offer a new open class in 10 days' time about Dracula, one short story by Bram Stoker. So watch out in our profile and Instagram and everything. And that's it. Thank you very much. Do you have questions or
If you have any
comments?
questions, you can either speak or you can use the chat, of course, if you want to. Anything, any doubts, any comments? Thank you, Maina. I'm glad that you have enjoyed it. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everybody, for being here, for joining us. And if you want to talk to us, you can always talk to us directly on our WhatsApp, right? I'll leave the contact here just for you to have it. And but in any case, in either Instagram or WhatsApp, I'll be the one answering you. So it's always us that you're talking to. And you can come with your questions and comments even after class, okay? Thank you very much for the ones who are attending the next open class. We'll see you on the 27th, right?
That's great,
Okay,
guys. Thank
very
you very much
good.
for
I'm
the great
glad.
comments in the
Thank
chat.
you.
Take good care. Bye bye. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very mumuch. Thank you for
Bye
being
bye,
here today.
teachers.
Bye
Bye
bye,
bye,
Kimberly.
Kimberly.
Good to
Bye,
see you.
Angela.
Bye,
Bye,
Angela. Bye,
guys.
everybody. Bye, Adri. Bye, Bia. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye, Bia. We miss you too.